Welcome to the video. In this video I quickly want to show you this little thing here. Now this is the Cheerson CX95S. It's an all-in-one quadcopter. It has a little FPV camera and video transmitter in there, has 40 channels, brushed little motors with 3-bladed props, prop guards as well, and it also comes with a battery and the charger, and it has a DSM capable receiver, so if you have a Spectrum radio then you can connect to it and fly. Now the reason that we're looking at this is because one of my friends is interested in getting into FPV in quadcopters. He quite likes his quadcopters line of sight, but he's not sure about FPV, so this is quite a cute way for him to have a go at it indoors without getting into trouble. Now this is that kind of tiny whoop configuration. We got ours from AliExpress. It was about 45 quid. We'll show you what comes in the box because you get some bits and pieces and spares as well. But it's very similar to a lot of the other quadcopters here. But this kind of format and layout is getting very, very popular with things like the tiny whoop. We've looked at a few over Christmas as well. This just happens to be one of the latest and greatest. And I'm interested in getting it in because it's a pretty decent flight controller from what I can see, and it also is running Betaflight. So what we'll do in the video, we'll actually go through, show you what comes in the box, connect it up to Betaflight. I'll show you how it comes configured as standard, show you a little bit of flight footage and what the FPV camera looks like as well, and then we'll do a summary at the end. Now the way it comes in the box is obviously you get the model itself, and then when you open it you get a very basic manual. You get the charging cable for the battery, you get one battery which is a little 400 milliamp hour. That's only going to give you about 5 minutes of flight time, so if you're going to get rid of these I'd recommend you order a couple of extra batteries. I did. It just means then that if you want to continue on flying you can. And then the only other thing in the pack is 4 additional spare props. So if you do manage to break one, then you can get hold of them as well. These things are available in lots of different colours, so you don't have to go for this slightly gaudy green. The thing that I'm not a big fan of on this one is you do have to be a little bit careful. These, I don't know if you can see, one of my guards has already broken in a very light crash, so it might be worthwhile also potentially getting a couple of spares as well. On the underneath you have all the main controls, so you have the connector for a micro USB cable so you can connect it up to your computer, and you can see all the motors nicely plug in. Everything is very accessible, so if you do need to replace these motors you can get all the spare parts for this thing. Then it's a very easy plug and play. You don't have to take things apart and start soldering, which is nice. The only other control on the whole thing is this button on the top. A short press will change the channel for the video transmitter, a long press will change the band, and you have that kind of whippy style dipole antenna at the top. Now this is actually quite nice because it does mean that rather than have to worry about breaking or snapping off the little circular polarized antennas like you have on this thing, you don't have to worry about that because this just bends out the way when you get it all wrong. In terms of weight, let me show you how heavy this thing is. If we put the battery on the scale as well, it's about 32 grams without the battery. With the battery it's only about 43. So it is quite lightweight. Wind is going to affect it, so I would only really fly this indoors. Connecting it up to Betaflight is lovely. I do like the fact that you can actually configure this thing and set it up how you want to. You can see that the ESC motor feature is set as brushed and that it's set for motor stop. So when you arm this little guy, it won't start running the motors. You have to increase the throttle, which I think for indoor quads is a very good way of doing it. It's actually set for the onboard Spectrum satellite, set for Spectrum 1024. There are a number of things in Betaflight that seem to be turned on that I'm not sure why they are. We could probably turn them off. Things like VBAT being enabled, RSSI signal strength being enabled, things like the current meter being enabled as well. There's lots of features in here that actually you probably can turn off, and as I'm playing with this I probably will do, just to reduce the amount of overhead that the processor has to do for parts of Betaflight that this little guy isn't going to be using. PID tuning seems okay. It's flying beautifully out the box. This is a little indoor brushed quad. I'm not expecting to do acro flips and rolls with it. The setup for the receiver needs to be like this. Most Spectrum radios will kind of default to the throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder, order. Just double check that it's all working in here, and double check that once you've bound to the model that the center values for roll, pitch and yaw are settling at about 1500 and that the throttle channel is dropping as well. Calibrate the accelerometer. Just double check that the modes are okay. These are the default modes. Auxiliary 1 is set to arm the board or not, and auxiliary 2 is just set for angle. That's the only modes that are set up. So once you've gone in there, once you've bound the radio to it, checked that the radio is working fine, calibrated your accelerometer, then you're good and you can fly. And flying around is a very nice experience. The camera is pretty good. It copes with light conditions reasonably well. The FPV camera and video transmitter all in a door-to-board at the top of the canopy, and again you can get replacements for those. I found it took a little bit of time to eventually get the band and channel working so that I could see what I was doing when I was flying this around, because there's no indication or flashing LED to show you which band and frequency you were on. Mine defaulted, I think it must have been band A, channel 1, because it took me a lot of clicking around to eventually find the band and frequency that I needed for my Fat Shark goggles. It was actually easier using things like the Quantum Cyclopses and those kind of goggles that have an auto scan feature, so that the goggle can actually go away and find the channel that is being used. Well, I do like how easy this is to fly. It is relatively tough in crashes, although we have managed to break one of the surrounds. So I might order a couple more of those if I was going to order this, because that's the part of the frame that's going to take the bumps. It is simple to set up. Betaflight is what most pilots will know and love, and also having a little play with a model like this with Betaflight is great experience, because if you like something like this and FPV is fun, then when you move on to bigger models, like hopefully my friend is going to do, then all of that Betaflight experience can move with you. Or if you want this as a little indoor flyer for those days when it's really horrible weather and you can't fly outside, then again you're going to have the same kind of interface and setup and experience as you do with all the other quads that you're using. Do like the fact it comes with spare props. A couple of extra spare batteries would have been nice. The fact it's got one here that gives you about 5 minutes flight time is great, but I always like to have at least one more battery so one can be charging while the other one's flying. The flight controller that's actually in here, if I just show you in the manual, does actually have connections for S-Bus. So what I'm guessing here is that if you had an S-Bus compatible receiver, one of the really small ones, you might be able to change this over from the DSM receiver that's in here by default. Things that I would say just think about before you buy one of these things. There's no spare motors in the box. These things are considered sacrificial. They eventually will give up, the brushes will wear out, and you'll find that you'll have trouble hovering, or it will start to be quite lazy as you're flying around. Some of the other quads that I've been playing with actually have spare motors in there, so again, be aware of that. They won't last forever. A little more power would have been great. This is hovering around just above kind of half throttle, fine for mooching around the house, but this isn't going to break any world speed records. Personally, I like a little bit more power when I'm flying indoors. It means that if I get the approach to flying under something like a chair wrong, then I can blip the throttle and avoid catching the carpet and tumbling over the floor. The video transmitter on here is only 25 milliwatts, and it's only this kind of stubby kind of aerial, so do watch for your distances. On the specs I was reading, it talks about 30 to 50 meters. I think that's in very ideal conditions. It'll work okay indoors, but you won't want to try and fly this around in a park. You probably want something with a slightly more useful aerial on that if you're going to want to fly any distance away from you. But flying around a house, the little video transmitter seems to work fine. There is no FPV band and frequency display, so if you are trying to set this up and trying to get it working, it is a bit tricky to say the least. Also be aware that the video transmitter is going to get warm in use too. This little canopy does get a little warm, so I'm surprised I haven't got any kind of venting in here too, but just be aware of that. If after a flight, it's probably worthwhile just giving it a minute to cool down before you take it off again. Last couple of things, I recommended when we talked about Betaflight popping this on a flat surface and clicking the calibrate accelerometer button like we would on any quad. Having the USB connector at the bottom makes that very tricky. You have to kind of have it off the edge of a table and try and do your best to keep it still. So that's probably not a great piece of design. And the last thing to mention is the DSM receiver on board won't be to everyone's taste. Not everyone is running a DSM compatible radio like a Spectrum. So I just wanted to show this thing to you. Again, I'll put a link in the description. If you're interested in a little FPV indoor quad, this is definitely worth a look. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. We try and release at least 2 videos a week, usually a quick tip on a Tuesday and a more in-depth video on a Friday. And sometimes we manage to get a few more out as well. If you're interested in radio control, then the playlists are useful to have a look at. Anything that's called Introduction To is an organised set of videos that teach you from first principles about the subject that you're interested in. But we also have information about the majority of popular open source flight controllers, how to build quadcopters, fixed wing models, reviews, setups, unboxing, all kinds of things in here as well. So if you haven't already had a look at the playlist, then I'd recommend going and have a look through here to see if there's anything that takes your fancy. Finally, we do also provide updates through things like Twitter, Instagram, and also post all of our 3D designs on Thingiverse as well. So if you like what we're doing here on YouTube, have a look at those things and subscribe to us there, and you'll find out what we're up to in advance of the videos coming out here on the channel.